Hello and welcome to the final episode of Ancient Agriculture. In this episode, we'll talk about ancient trade between Africa and Southeast Asian realms. You see, many of the crops found within Africa have a Near Eastern origin or an Indian origin, and vice versa. In this episode, we'll talk about the ancient trade routes during the Neolithic era regarding different crops, utilizing two different papers. Our first paper is by Anirudh K. Singh, who was studying the trade of different crops in what is now modern-day Africa, modern-day India, modern-day Egypt, and modern-day Arabia, as well as parts of the Mediterranean, Near Eastern, and Central Asian trade routes. Let's begin. We'll start off with the first crop on our hit list, the faba bean, or Vicia faba. The faba bean is a edible legume that can grow to a height of 2 to 4 feet, that produce small pods that contain 3 to 8 seeds, and are round and oval in nature. In India, it's eaten and cultivated in the northwest and eastern states of Maharashtra. Based on genetic evidence, the geographic origin of the primordial form of faba bean originates in the Near East, although the primordial form is not to be found. The earliest known evidence of consumption of faba bean dates back to the 14th millennium BC, almost 3,000 years before its domestication. Its ancient forms have been found in different parts of the Near East, such as Russia, China, and Japan as well. It was also found in its wild form in India, based in archaeological evidence. However, the most primitive form of the domesticated form of faba bean has been found in India and Afghanistan, and are both very similar in terms of physiology, indicating that it came to India from Afghanistan very early on in the domestication process. Next we'll cover chickpea. This species was likely domesticated in southwestern Asia, specifically Turkey and parts of Syria, because 3 annual species closely related to the wild ancestor of the common chickpea are found there, and both the domesticated chickpea, the wild chickpea, and their 3 closest relatives are all very genetically similar. The earliest known evidence of chickpea comes from Turkey around 7000 BC, based on current archaeological digs. Based on both Sanskrit writings and archaeological evidence, it's likely that it was first domesticated in Turkey and then introduced to other parts of the world, eventually entering India as early as 2000 BCE. The general theme is it was domesticated in Turkey, spread throughout the Middle East, following that it entered into Mediterranean regions, and from there it entered India. This was likely the result of migrating human settlements, with groups from the Mediterranean region migrating to India and integrating into Indian society, bringing their plants along with it. The next plant on our hit list would be cluster bean or guar. Used to make guar gum. Guar is derived from the Sanskrit word guarhar, which means cow fodder. It's primarily grown in small parts of India, specifically Rajasthan, Haryana, and Gujarat. 8% of global production is produced by India. The presence of many wild relatives of this bean are found in tropical Africa, and no wild relatives are found in India, indicating that it was likely an import from Africa in ancient times. It is plausible that it was actually domesticated in Africa and Arabia in ancient times, and from there it made its way into the Indian subcontinent. Although other researchers, such as Dr. Xavier, postulate that the ancient distribution of the primordial form of guar probably extended up to the Sindh region in India, and the domesticated form or the remnants of that ancient Indian population. Based on current genetic information, it's likely that this species was domesticated in western Rajasthan. Based on current genetic evidence, however, as seen by Dr. Hemowitz, the wild species seems to be Leguminous Cyanopsis senegalensis, which was then domesticated into the species Cyanopsis tetrachoglabis. This actually makes sense since this wild species has been used historically to feed horses in Arabia. The current hypothesis is that since the species is found both in Africa and the Arabian desert, it was likely domesticated This species was likely domesticated in Senegal, Africa, and through trade between Africa and Arabia, it reached Arabia. Then the wild species reached India through trade between India and Arabia, and over time the species was domesticated by the Indian people, and then the continuous trade allowed these cultivars to be brought back to Arabia and then Africa. The next crop on our hit list is another legume, the cowpea. Like the preceding ones, these are annuals. Indeed, every crop on this list is on the screen right now. The cowpea was likely domesticated from its wild subspecies in Western Africa as an intermediary form between domesticated and undomesticated cowpeas has been found in Central Africa. And the earliest examples of cultivated cowpea are found in the dig site surrounding Akintampo ruins, based in Western Africa. Although varying degrees of archaeobotanical information, although sparse, in combination with Sanskrit folklore, indicate a possible Asian origin. But, based on the genetic evidence, which is more all-encompassing, it is likely of African origin since the intermediary form between the wild and domesticated cowpea has been confirmed in West Africa of West African origin. It is likely that this species came to India around 50 BCE as part of a trade route. There have been pieces of botanical and archaeological evidence that showcased seafarer-based trade between East Africa and ancient South Asia. Now onto the hyacinth bean. Also known as lablab, it belongs to the species Lablab purpureus. It's a clumbing vine known for its bright purple flowers, and bean pods contain up to 4 seeds. Most conventional wisdom suggests that this species is of African origin, with domestication happening in India, with a new breeding program happening in India to change the physiology somewhat, as well as a few feral lineages. All the available data, however, seems to suggest that this general convention is correct, based on the greater levels of genetic diversity being found in Nubia, or present-day Sudan. The absence of ancient Arabian cultivation suggests that this species was transported to India via sea routes. Given that many of these specimens in the archaeobotanical record date to around the same dates as that of cowpea, it's likely that these two species were transported to India around the same time. The next species on our hit list is the grass pea, also known as Laphurus sativus. It's another legume species, and the Laphurus species are native to temperate areas around Europe and Asia, as well as parts of America. Laphurus sativus is probably derived from the genetically closest wild species, Laphurus caesarea, and is one of the oldest cultivated crops with a long history of domestication. Vavilov suggested 2 centers of origin for the species, one in the Near East and the other in Southeast Asia and parts of Africa. Later evidence by Dr. Smart suggested that it may have originated in southwestern and central Asia and was transported to the rest of the world from there. Further evidence, however, by various paleontologists suggests that this species was domesticated around 8000 BCE in the Balkan Peninsula, making it the first crop to be domesticated in Europe. Although it is in contention due to the fact that Laphurus species of unknown pedigree have been found in Turkey and Iraq dating back to 8000 BCE as well. It is likely that, based on the fact of how ancient this crop is, migrating human settlements from across the world may have interacted with each other and, on occasion, obtained, either by force or trade, this species and brought to parts of India from there. The next plant on our hit list is the lentil. The lentil was domesticated from its wild subspecies, with possible introductions of DNA from other wild relatives. It is well known that it was domesticated in the Near East, and is one of the oldest crops in the Old World. The earliest known evidence of this plant in the archaeological records dates back to 1100 BCE in Greece. Dr. D. Kandul in 1882 suggested that this introduction to India occurred with the arrival of the punitive Aryans. Most recent evidence seems to suggest otherwise, as the presence of lentil predates the Aryan invasion in India. Since the species is naturally found all across the Fertile Crescent and spread rapidly through the dispersal of different peoples across Europe and Africa and Asia, including parts of India, this indicates that the natural movement of people throughout the land masses allowed for this plant to be collected and moved to India. The last plant on our hit list would be the pea. The distribution of the wild pea is restricted to the Mediterranean basin and the Near East, and was likely domesticated there. The earliest known references to peas date back to 46,000 years ago, as pea starch was found on remnants of teeth in the Shandar cave in Kursk, Iraq. Undomesticated pea remains have also been found 23,000 years ago as well in the Ohallo II dig site in Israel, with the earliest known domesticated forms of peas being found in Syria, dating back to 9300 BC, likely indicating that the pea was domesticated in Syria, or a close region of it. The peas were likely brought to India via the primordial tribespeople of that era, so the majority of the staple crops like lentils, peas, chickpeas, faba beans, and the like were likely brought over to their respective locations via primordial people who first settled the India subcontinent, while plants like the cow bean, the hyacinth bean, and the guar bean were likely obtained through trade. Now on to the next segment. The next paper is by Dr. Jacob Morales and co., and it involves him looking into trying to figure out the spread of different crops from Southwest Asia to Northwestern Africa. To that end, various dig sites were excavated and various materials were collected and dated. Once the data was analyzed, here are the results. Most of the earliest parts of the dig site that are dated to the late mid-6th millennium BC, there's a general trend to increase genetic diversity of crops, relying more and more on wheat and barley, with emmer being non-existent within this group, while in prior dig sites that date back even earlier, a greater level of crop diversity made an appearance, such as emmer and various groups of barley subspecies. Similar results have been found in other areas in Europe, such as the Iberian Peninsula, France, and Italy. However, in Morocco, dig sites that date between 5500 BC and 5000 BC showcase remnants of southwestern Asian plants, indicating that these species were introduced to Morocco during that time period. These include remnants of peas and faba beans. Based on the remnants of goats being found there, it is likely that this trade happened relatively early on in human history, roughly between 5210 and 4993 BEC. No African crops such as sorghum or pearl millet were found in the Neolithic layers, however, indicating that these crops were likely domesticated much later. And that about covers everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to me on BitChute for a greater variety of content, 4 videos a week. And thank you to all my subscribers on both platforms. I appreciate it.